short for the win. It's good! Gosiewski takes flight as SGA plays through the contact, banks it in on the foul.
What is up, Thunder fans, and welcome to the uncontested post-game, uncontested podcast, post-game podcast edition. We are a proud part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and the official podcast of SI Thunder. I am your host, Taylor Peterson. That's right. You guys are stuck with me again, 2 post-game straight. You can find me on Twitter at Taylor_P15. And you can find us at the Uncontested on Twitter at the _Uncontested. You can find us on just about all socials, including Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and even TikTok. Hopefully some of you are tuning in via YouTube right now. I also know that some of you have tweeted at us recently, and I think the restream link to Twitter, you're having trouble being able to view us live on Twitter. So highly recommend you going and finding us on YouTube at the _Uncontested and joining that way. You can also find us on Facebook. And we're working on trying to find a way to broadcast live on Instagram. But in the meantime, YouTube is probably the way to go. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Obviously a very, very important day for many, many reasons. And this is a post-game podcast, so we won't dive into them all. But with that being said, a fun day for basketball fans, especially those who were lucky enough to be off work. I was not. But the Thunder played a very fun one against the Dallas Mavericks on this MLK Jr. Day, falling to the Mavs 104-102 in a very, very, I guess you could say fun one, but really it was a fun second half. First half wasn't quite as fun as the second. But after a slow first half, the second half did not disappoint at all. And we'll dive into it. Thunder were down by as much as 22 in the third quarter, but a late run towards the end of the third quarter, I believe the last 6 minutes or so, but I have that later on in my notes. It kept it close all the way to the end of the game. Thunder end up ultimately losing by 2 points. But like I said, another very fun game to break down. Been quite a few of those recently for us Thunder fans, and that's certainly made things much more entertaining and very fun. So some notes before we get into the game. Darius Bazley starts again. Finally starts again here. Excuse me, for the first time since, I believe, mid-December. I don't have that date in front of me right now. But Coach Daignault said he liked the matchup versus Porzingis. He wanted Bazley out there to guard Porzingis specifically. And he even mentioned that Bazley would have started last week against Brooklyn if KD would have played. And, this isn't super surprising if you guys have followed along with some of the beat reporters and our own guy, Crane NBA, Nick Crane. He's mentioned, Daignault's mentioned with Bazley's recent play that it certainly wouldn't be out of the realm to necessarily start him moving forward again. And we saw that tonight. And Daignault said that was mainly because of the matchup, but obviously Bazley's been playing much better in his bench role. Unfortunately, as we'll get into, that didn't necessarily translate when he was back in the starting lineup again. But another note, the Mavs were 8-1 in January coming into tonight's game. Obviously now 9-1. They're playing really good basketball. Even if tonight wasn't some of their best basketball, I saw a stat. I didn't save it. I probably should have. I believe I saw this yesterday. But essentially, the Mavericks are one of the best defensive or have been one of the best defensive teams during that 8-1, now 9-1 stretch. Really, ever since Luka came back from COVID protocols, they've been playing really good on both ends of the floor, but especially the defensive end. So obviously, coming into this game is going to be a little tough for OKC. But like I said, first half very slow. First quarter, starter Bays, not so good. We saw the starter Bays of old. We did not see the new bench Bays. Very first play of the game, the very first shot that he had, blocked by Porzingis. Funny enough, the same thing happened. His first shot in the second half, it wasn't good. Porzingis got off to a very hot start. Had the first 5 points of the half, I believe. Had like 9 of the Mavericks' first 11 points or something like that. Wasn't great. First time out of the game happens with about, I don't know, maybe 6 minutes left in the first quarter. Wiggins comes in for Bazley. He's the first sub off the bench at the timeout. That tells you how Bazley was playing. However, to his defense, Porzingis also was subbed out, right? And so that's probably that could be more so why we saw saw Baisley get subbed out, but regardless, it wasn't good. It wasn't good at all. We'll get into that more here in a little bit. Dallas already had 10 free throws very early into the game, or towards the end of the first quarter. There was a lot of fouling going on, and that was a theme that carried throughout the entirety of the game. Some justified and warranted, based off how OKC was defending the Mavericks and some of the poor defense that they had off and on throughout the game, but also a lot of iffy calls that Luka was getting, especially after complaining to the refs, kind of like Bickerstaff the other night. When he kept complaining, then the next thing you know, the refs are calling the second half much tighter. Very similar situation here as well. OKC got out rebounded 15-9 in the first quarter, which is kind of interesting because we thought that would happen Saturday night against the Cavs. But it didn't. The Thunder actually out rebounded the Cavaliers. Well, tonight they were getting beat on the boards, and ultimately they got out rebounded at the end of the game as well, or throughout the entirety of the game. I thought Dort, and I have Dort and Lou here in my notes, but I thought Dort and Shea both were aggressive early, which is great to see. This is from Nick Gallo of OKC Thunder. It's a fun stat. Lou Dort has hit 10 of his last 19 three-point attempts. Obviously, it's in the first quarter. He's got 8 points in the first quarter for OKC. Now has at least 2 made threes in 26 of his last 30 games. Actually, Worldwide Wob, I'm sure many of you listeners are familiar with him and his Twitter account. He mentioned how crazy it is looking back on, Lou Dort's game 7, against the Houston Rockets in the bubble, where he was just being left open to shoot. And then now it almost seems like it's an easy layup for Lou shooting from three, which obviously, as Thunder fans know, is it's not necessarily the case. He's not quite that good from three. But Wap's point does still stand in the sense that it is pretty incredible seeing the offensive improvement from Lou. And we'll get into his overall offensive improvement because he was fantastic offensively on both of the floor tonight. A great two-way game from Lou. But his three-point shot was already there in the first quarter. And you know it's going to be a fun game, especially offensively from Lou, when he's hitting those threes early on. Second quarter, scoring drought was just awful for both teams. It was just an ugly quarter all around. Porzingis had 3 fouls, so he goes out pretty quickly. Mavericks switched to a zone to try and limit OKC's drives because that was the only way that OKC was really scoring against the Mavericks. Mavericks couldn't score either. Thunder trailed the Mavs 53-42 at the half. Lou has 14 points. Shea has 11 points, 3 rebounds. Giddey had 4 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. Really was kind of the big threes night all night. And that showed in the first half. But again, it's just really rough. Thunder weren't able to really get stops. Is just ugly offense from both teams. To that point, Thunder shoot 35% from the floor and 17.6% from three. The Mavs were not much better at all. I don't have their percentages here either, but as you can see, pretty bad. A pretty boring half as well. If you all are Marvel nerds like I am, like my co-host JD Silva is, trying to think. Some of our other guys like Marvel, but I don't think as much as maybe JD and me do. But the Moon Knight trailer came out during another kind of rough NFL game tonight, Monday Night Football. And I was thinking at this point, and I made the joke, maybe I'm just going to have to pull a Ringer binge mode and just break down the Moon Knight trailer for the post-game podcast instead of covering this game, because there wasn't a whole lot to cover in the first half. But the second half happens, and man, it was a blast. In the sense that, I guess, Saturday night's game against the Cavs was a tale of two halves, where the Thunder played great in the first half, not so great in the second. The inverse was true here, although it was both teams who played much better in the second half, and have thankfully given me quite a bit to dive into here. The third quarter, Daigneault pulls a surprise. He starts Trey Mann instead of JRE, and we'll get into this. So essentially, he started Shea, Trey Mann, Giddey, Lou, and Baisley. No true center. Luka was getting a lot of Luka calls early on the third. The Thunder were down 11 heading into the third. That goes all the way up to 22. Thunder did not look great. It seemed pretty obvious that they were having trouble with the Mavericks' size. It was not looking good. However, Daigneault stuck to his guns, which we will get into that as well. The Mavs got up to a 22-point lead, like I mentioned. Thunder started to come back, 24-7 run, the final 6 minutes and 13 seconds. They cut it to a 2-point lead for the Mavs, largely led by SGA. 15 points for Shea in the third quarter. Pretty wild. and it just felt like he was either scoring or assisting on just almost every basket. But it's a full team effort. And what I really loved about Dignant is even though he didn't play a true center the entire quarter, like I said, he stuck to his guns, but he stayed small, and he substituted in guys like Wiggins, Mann, Ty Jerome, JRE, Bays, actually Bays was just out when he got subbed out about midway, a little earlier than midway in the third quarter. He didn't see the floor again, and honestly, rightfully so. But instead of subbing in guys, we saw Muscala in the fourth quarter. We didn't see him, if at all, in the third. We didn't see Favors at all tonight. Diakite had some pretty solid minutes again, defensively, was able to kind of help with Porzingis there in the first half. We didn't see him again in the second half. Dignant stuck to his guns, and it paid off. Thunder going that huge run, make it a 2-point game heading into the fourth, and the fourth quarter did not disappoint either. Thunder and Mavs go back and forth. Both offenses were strong, but Thunder's defense kind of struggled there to start the fourth quarter. For the first part of the fourth quarter, it felt like they were still the Thunder were still scoring, but the Mavs are scoring more. The Mavs were getting 3-point shots. We're getting a few more stops than the Thunder. Next thing you know, it's close to like an 8-point lead for the Mavs. It seems like they're starting to pull back away. Shea had a monster dunk. So he comes back in with about 7:30 left, 7:45 left. Shea has a monster dunk as he flies past Porzingis and whoever else was defending him on the perimeter with about 4 minutes left in the game. And that kind of sparked what was a wild finish. Lou gets a steal and a layup to cut it to a 4-point lead for the Mavericks. But then on the other end of the floor, Lou's playing defense on Luka. He doesn't see Jalen Brunson coming up to set a pick. Brunson gets set. Lou trucks him. I can't believe Brunson even got up from that unintentionally. Lou didn't see him coming, but goodness, I would not want to be hit setting a pick on Lou. Lou fouls out at this point. We're thinking, oh no, not looking good. So Trey Mann comes back in. Trey Mann gets quite a bit of burn in this game again, which is great to see. He, after starting the second half, he comes in for Lou after Lou fouls out. He gets a steal on the defensive end, which is great to see. He gets fouled, and then he hits both free throws. We're back into this thing. Well, then the Mavs come down. They hit a three. It starts to look bleak. I believe the Mavs were up 5 or 6 at this point. But the Thunder get a stop. Then Shea drives down for another dunk in transition. 2-point game. Thunder foul Hardaway. He misses 1 of 2 free throws. 20 seconds to go. Thunder ball. Thunder down 3. Giddey runs into Muscala on the inbound play. And Giddey played solid. We'll get into him. Runs into Muscala on the inbound play. Mavs get a fast break. It feels over, right? So a 5-point game at this point. Shea scores again very, very quickly, which was huge. Then they foul Brunson. Dagon doesn't call a timeout, which was interesting, but ended up being the right call. So Thunder down 5 with about 8 seconds to go. This was important that he trusted in his guys because Shea and Ty, they push the ball. Ty Jerome gets a 3. Mavs missed both free throws. Then Dagon was able to use his final timeout. The Thunder are down 2 with 2.6 seconds left to go. Another inbound play. Another unfortunate turnout. Giddey forces it to Muscala. Turnover. Ball game. So it was again pretty wild. Mark says that this was interesting post game. I didn't recognize this until I heard him say this, but Mark said that the play that the Thunder ran at the end of the game was the same one they ran against New Orleans, where Shea nailed the step back 3-point shot before Graham obviously hits the 3/4 court shot and wins the game. He says when they run this play, Giddey, who's inbounding the ball, has Ty Jerome on the baseline, Muscala on the backside, SJ at the top of the key. And we were talking about this in our uncontested Slack after the game. It very much seemed like a play set to get Shea the ball at the top of the key. Everybody else clears out and let him go ISO on his defender. Hopefully, setting some picks earlier on in the play, you get a favorable defensive matchup for Shea. And again, he either hits that step back 3, or in this case, he's able to drive to the rim and either draw a foul to hit free throws to tie it up, or he gets a layup. But instead, you could tell Giddey was a little flustered. He tried to force a pass to Mike Muscala that just wasn't quite there. Obviously, that's option number 2. And unfortunately, leads to a turnover and the Thunder lose. However, I'm not putting all the blame on Giddey or anything like that. I think this is fantastic experience for him. I mean, these are kind of games, we talked about Shea um, and Lou playing with Chris Paul a couple seasons ago and how that would pay dividends down the road. And we're already seeing that, for example, with both of those players. Possessions like these, clutch moments like these for Giddey, not just being in 20-point blowouts every single game during the quote unquote tank, right? Like putting Giddey in these opportunities, I think, are going to be so beneficial, are going to pay so many dividends down the road when the Thunder are contending again for the playoffs and eventually, hopefully, a championship. And so I'm not going to blame him for that. I think this is a great learning experience. If you guys listen to my post game I did on Saturday night, I keep wanting to say Sunday, Saturday night against the Cavs, you'll hopefully remember a little segment I did listening to Giddey's post game, how mature that he is. Obviously, he's going to take those last two inbound plays to heart, and he's going to learn from them. And I think that's fantastic. Again, helps our draft odds as well. So kind of a win-win all around and a very, very fun ending. Just some post game notes really quick before we dive into some overall themes. The Thunder shoot 44% in the second half, obviously, compared to the stats I threw out earlier for the first half. Much, much better. Bays didn't touch the floor after being subbed out. I think I mentioned that. He had subbed out in the third quarter, doesn't see the floor again. And I think that just shows you kind of how the coaching staff and the organization views Bazley right now as a whole. And that's unfortunate. Obviously, he's had some really good stretches coming off the bench. But Bays' biggest thing throughout his entire young career so far of 3 seasons is inconsistency. And he just cannot find that consistency. Some of that's internal. Or I would say the majority of that's internal. I don't know. It's frustrating as a fan as well who wants to see him succeed. And so Bays does not see the floor again after being subbed out. This is also an interesting note. Again, kind of relates to a stat I threw out there in my post game Saturday night against the Cavs. 2 additional 30-point quarters tonight in the second half for OKC. And like I said, I mentioned this in that post game a couple of nights ago, but the Thunder against the Cavs, heading into that game against the Cavs, had 4 straight 30-point quarters. The first quarter against the Cavs, that made 5 straight 30-point quarters or more, 30 points or more quarters. And then they fell just short of 6 straight after the second quarter. I believe they scored like 27 or something like that in the quarter instead of 30 points. The offense really struggled from there, obviously, in the second half against the Cavaliers. And that, like I said, extended all the way through the first half of this game. But I just found this really interesting because I heard one of the broadcasters mention it tonight. Thunder had 2 additional 30-point quarters each in the third and fourth quarter tonight. And I think we see that certainly corresponds to the product we're seeing on the floor, especially when you compare the last 4 quarters the Thunder played to these. The last 2 quarters against the Cavaliers and the first 2 quarters tonight against the Mavericks, compared to these last 2 that they played tonight against the Mavericks in the second half, as well as some of the some of the games that they played earlier in the week last week. That matches the eye test. So just kind of interesting. Again, kind of corresponds with the post game I did a couple nights ago. But now for some themes. And I am just sticking to my guns here, going negatives and positives, starting with the negatives, always ends on the positives because there were many more positives tonight, in my opinion. My first negative is Darius Bazley. They just, I have to start with it. And I hate to keep kind of ragging on Bazley in my negatives. I feel like if I go back throughout my post games, he's kind of showing up here more. And obviously he's had a fantastic stretch coming off the bench ever since mid-December. He's looked so much better, especially, like I said, against the Cavaliers. He had a great game overall. Was one of the Thunder's better players. But tonight, when he's back in the starting lineup, really bad. And full disclaimer, I understand it was a very tough matchup against Kristaps Porzingis, who obviously there's very few players in the league who can guard a 7+ footer who can space the floor, right? But it wasn't just him guarding Porzingis. It was him going back to some of his old habits and old ways offensively, where he just is a ball stopper on offense. He catches the ball. He's not making quick decisions. By the time he decides what he's doing, the defender already knows, and it's either blocking him or causing him to drive and do a crazy turnover. It got to the point, to be completely blunt, he was a detriment to the team on that end, and that is why Daigneault didn't play him again in the second half. That's how poor he played, even on a rebuilding team. And I don't mean for this to sound like super bleak and like I'm just coming after Baisley, but he couldn't even get back in the game, right? And I think that just kind of proves what we've been talking about here about Baisley throughout this season. And I hate that for him because you see those flashes of talent. And so it's just frustrating that he can't seem to string this all together, that keeps resorting back to bad habits, the poor IQ that we mentioned, right? And I don't know. It's frustrating. I just hope he can find that consistency, especially as he heads into a quote unquote contract year. And I wouldn't be surprised at this point to see him come off the bench for the rest of the season now. Again, I know that sounds kind of harsh. My segment on Baisley, I think very highly of him as a person, would like to see him succeed. But at this point, I'm not feeling great about it. And it's just something to monitor. I hope he continues to find success coming off the bench the rest of the season and can kind of develop some better habits, I think, moving forward. And that might save his career in the NBA, if we're being completely honest. My next negative is not a player. Actually, my next two negatives are not players, and those are the only other negatives I really have. But this next one is fouls. 23 fouls, Mavs 19. Now, hear me out. Some of those fouls were not really fouls and were very quote unquote Luka favored. Like I said, after Luka was complaining there in the first and into the second half, he started getting some very interesting calls, to say the least. I'm never going to, especially during a tanking season, never going to blame the game on fouls. But it's worth mentioning that disclaimer when I bring up the fouls as a negative point for this team. When I say that, I really mean that first half. There wasn't so many questionable calls then as much as it was just poor defense from the Thunder's standpoint. And that's to be expected when you have a young, fairly inexperienced team, right? And I get that, especially with some talented offensive players on the floor, even outside of Luka for the Dallas Mavericks. So something I want to see, the Thunder continue to work on, and again, like continue to get that experience, especially for young guys like Trey Mann. I just went blank. Trey Mann, Aaron Wiggins, JRE, right? Guys like that getting experience against some of the high caliber offensive players that we saw against the Mavericks, right? This is really good experience for them to help them kind of hone that in the coming seasons and even this season. But again, a negative worth mentioning. Turnovers is my other one. 13 turnovers to the Mavs 11. It's great that the Thunder forced 11 turnovers for the Mavericks. And again, this is kind of another one that maybe gets a little bit of a pass when you have young Thunder players, but I also think they cleaned a lot of this up in the second half, but there's definitely room for improvement there. But enough negatives. Like I said, those last two I kind of had to stretch for a bit, mainly because there was a lot of positives in this one I'm excited to talk about. And my first one here that I have, not even worth burying the lead, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. All-star level performance. One could argue superstar performance. 34 points. Well, there we go. 34 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, 11 and 18 from the floor, only 4 3-point attempts, which is fascinating. Again, when Shai was kind of going through that slump here a couple weeks ago, prior to him being out like for, what was it, just 1, maybe 2 games due to COVID protocols, he comes back. He's not been shooting nearly as many threes. He's been much more aggressive. We're going to get into that. Only 4 3-point attempts tonight, which was just very interesting and fascinating. And you can see how effective he's been at the rim. And to that point, 11-12 from the free throw line. That is, yes, that's James Harden-esque. That's Luka Doncic-esque, right? Like that's big time. He's starting to get some of these calls. One could argue he even wasn't getting all the calls that he should have been getting. 11 of his points coming from the free throw line. And even then, like I said, only 11 of 18 from the field. Very efficient. Absolutely incredible. 15 points for Shai in the third quarter. That's and this is from the Thunder broadcast. I want to say it was Gallo again who mentioned this stat. 12th most points in third quarters in the league for SGA, which is wild. And, we talked a lot about early on in the season, third quarter Shai. It's absolutely a thing. Again, he went through that slump there, which probably here about a month ago, which probably brought him back down. That's still very, very impressive when you think about some of the most talented players in the league. Shai being the 12th highest scorer in the third quarter. Excuse me, is very impressive. I really like this quote that Mark had, Coach Dagnall had post game. He mentioned how decisive, and I mentioned this here a little bit ago, how decisive Shea's being, how he continues to push the pace. That's the second straight game, by the way, that Daniel has mentioned that post game. The Mavs were double teaming, even sometimes triple teaming Shea, as we've seen throughout the season, and as we kind of saw when he was struggling going through that slump here, like I said here about a month or so ago. But Shea has now adjusted to this, right? And that's what we were challenging Shea to do, hoping to see him do. Shea is now adjusting to this where he's beating these double teams before they can even trap him because he's making quick decisions. He's making very fast reads, and he's either distributing immediately or he's finding driving lanes before the defenders can come up to him, and he's driving to the rim. Obviously, we know how talented he is, how otherworldly he is around the rim, being able to being able to finish around defenders, and regardless of the length and the height, like we saw tonight, obviously against a very tall Mavs team, and also even more so a couple nights ago against the Cavaliers with Mobley and Jared Allen, like I mentioned in my post game a couple nights ago as well. But man, just really, really impressed. And I liked how Dignot mentioned that. And I put this in here. He, again, only 4 3-point attempts tonight, which I think is great, right? That's Shea adjusting. But, and I think it was Joe Masato who tweeted this out, Shea's passing up on those catch and shoot threes, and that's something. If you all have been listening to us throughout the season, you know that we've mentioned wanting to see Shea take more catch and shoot threes, get a little better at that. Obviously, a little more consistent with his 3-point shot in general. But the majority of his 3-point shots, I don't have the stats with me right now, are off the dribble or a step back, right? Essentially the same thing. And I truly feel that he's a catch and shoot three, and essentially a reliable three away from like not just all-star level, but superstar level. And, I don't feel like a homer saying that, because I see tweets from like Worldwide Wob talking about Shea after that game, not talking about Luka, not talking about the Mavs winning, talking about Shea. I see our good old friends over at the Step Back Mavericks podcast, mentioning how fun Shea is to watch, how much of a joy it is to get to play against SGA and watch him play, right? Again, I think he's a catch and shoot three specifically, but a reliable 3-point jumper away from full-on superstardom. And that's talking like maybe top 15 player in the league. And he's, I don't know. I think he's flirting with that when he's playing at this level consistently, right? Like I said, we saw him go through a slump here a couple months ago. I'm not trying to get carried away, just like I'm not trying to just completely go out and with the pitchforks, against Darius Baisley here a little bit ago earlier in the podcast. It's always somewhere in the middle, but exciting stuff from SGA. Again, his defense was really good tonight. I'm not going to, went a little long there, so I won't go as much into his defense, but he had 2 straight deflections in the third quarter, which were huge during that run. Plus he had 2 blocks on the night. We're seeing him be better and better in terms of his shot contesting and help side defense. Tonight marks Shea's 30 point game would be pretty awesome. Shea's third 30 piece in 4 games, and he's averaging in those 4 games 30 points, 5.8 rebounds, 7.3 assists on 54.5% from the floor, which is pretty incredible. Moving on to my next positive, Lou Dort. Kind of got the short end of the stick guarding Luka in terms of refereeing and just having to guard Luka in general, who obviously is an incredible top NBA talent. But like I said, some questionable foul calls there. Nonetheless, he holds Luka to 20 points on 4 of 17 shooting, 0 of 6 from 3. Luka didn't hit a single 3-point shot tonight, and 12 of Luka's points came from the free throw line. Some of those justified, some of those not. I don't know. I thought Lou did a very good job on him on the defensive end of the floor, especially after I kind of challenged him after the Cavs game, saying that maybe he was he obviously struggles against the quicker guards like Darius Garland, Steph Curry, but I felt he was a little less engaged defensively after being very engaged against James Harden. Well, tonight he comes out, he's very engaged defensively, does a solid job on Luka, right, and still comes out and scores 18 points on 7 of 14 shooting, 7 rebounds, doing a little bit of all of it. I continue to be super impressed with Lou. Really, really excited about what he's doing this season, although I understand that probably will change as the Thunder move towards contention. His role is going to probably simplify a little more than it is now, but I love what he's showing, the experience he's getting, the versatility. It's all great. So Lou Dort, my next positive. Positive after that, maybe a little less than the first two, but I thought Getty had a solid game overall. Didn't do anything huge, but I thought he played a really solid game. I thought he fit really well with the starters, played solid defense. In fact, so much so, and I noticed this, so I looked it up after the game. He played the third most minutes behind Lou and Shea. Daignault really trusted him tonight, used his length and his size, I thought, to the Thunder's advantage. Having a guy like Giddey who's so versatile on both ends of the floor, obviously, but having that size and strength to be not that he's necessarily the quickest defender or even the most physical defender yet, but using that size or having that size allows him to be able to guard some of these other wings and players on the other team, which therefore allowed Daignault to go smaller tonight. And I don't think it's coincidence that we see Giddey have the third most minutes behind Lou and Shea. I had that stat line pulled up here. Here we go. 10 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, only 4 of 10 from the floor. That's okay, but 2 of 4 from 3. That 3-point shot continues to look more and more refined, which is very exciting. Even if it's small sample size, we can't take a ton away. You obviously can tell a difference. And there was a stat in the broadcast as well about this. I want to say he's shooting like 40% from 3 over his past however many games, which is awesome to see. And like I said, 32 minutes. Only players with more is Lou with 36 and Shea with 37. So another solid night from Josh Giddey. Dare I say the Thunder are starting to form another okay 3? We will see. We will see. Just a small positive here, just to kind of group these last couple players together. Aaron Wiggins, really, really solid contribution. Played a huge role in that second half comeback. Again, his defensive versatility and size and being able to hit those shots from outside were huge. He ends up with 8 points and 5 rebounds. Love his hustle. Big Wiggins fan. Ty Jerome continued to do some of the small things and have as big of a first half or a game as he did in the first half of Saturday's game against the Cavaliers, with 6 points, 2 assists from him. Obviously, that huge 3 down the stretch made it very fun. And then Trey Mann, I love to see, again, he didn't necessarily have like a huge game offensively, 6 points on only 1 of 3 shooting, which is kind of crazy. And he had those 2 free throws down the stretch. But the fact that Diggle even had a quote about this post game, the fact that he is able to really compete defensively is really, really exciting. And that lineup of Shea, Lou, Trey Mann, Giddey, and Baisley was a lot of fun. I can only imagine what that would look like if the Thunder can look out and get one of these big-time players in the upcoming draft, substituting that player in for Baisley. Just very, very excited about Trey Mann as well. And I won't dive as much into depth about him as we get closer and closer into this podcast. I have 2 more positives here, and they're both kind of unique ones because they're not players. They aren't team stats. My next one is Coach Daignault. We often give coaches the blame when teams are losing. It's also easy in this circumstance to give Daignault praise when Thunder are developing players well, right? And so I'm not saying that, come 3 seasons from now and that the Thunder are competing for the playoffs, we aren't going to criticize Daignault some as he's learning and adjusting as well in those situations. But I thought Daignault has been doing a fantastic job, and I thought he did a fantastic job tonight. He, like I said, didn't play a true center all third quarter. Muscala comes in the fourth, so you could call that a true center if you want to, but he didn't, obviously, Favors didn't see the floor, like I mentioned. He basically played JRE and Baisley at the 5 the entire third. And not only that, when he was down 22, he stayed small, and it paid off. He substituted Wiggins, Mann, Ty Jerome, JRE, and, we'll throw Baisley in there, even though he didn't come back in and out. He just essentially went out. But just, it caused Mavs to adjust to him rather than him adjusting to the Mavs. And what I mean by that is you had Maxi Kleber didn't start the second half because the Thunder, the Mavs saw how the Thunder were starting and how they were going small. The Mavs had to adjust to Daignault rather than Daignault adjusting to what the Mavericks were doing, aka playing Diakite in the second half because the Porzingis was giving you trouble. And I loved his quote post game about this. He says, switching up the stars at half, and this isn't a direct quote, this is a paraphrase. And switching up the stars at half is he views it as a substitution, which he mentioned that as well when he started Muscala in the second half of the Cavaliers game. He felt that they were congested in terms of offense there in the second quarter, and I couldn't agree more. He wanted Trey's 3-point threat, so he threw him out there. And like I said, it worked great. I just feel like he's doing a really good job so far. Obviously, a great development, uh, great player development coach, and he did a really good job tonight. I was very pleased and really loved what he did with lineups, and also kind of sticking to his guns and seeing it pay off was really cool. So throwing Dayton in for the positives tonight. And then another fun one to end. Matt Pinto, the OKC Thunder radio broadcasts, I guess. I don't even know what you would call that, color commentator, whatever. With Chris Fisher out due to COVID contact tracing, thankfully it sounds like he's okay, so that's good as well. But Pinto stepped in the last 2 games and has done a fantastic job. He's first of all, he's very good. He has good chemistry overall with Michael Cage, which is fascinating. But third, he's hilarious, and he's such a Thunder homer, and I love it so much. So like for example, I'm thinking about the play where Luka tweaks his ankle again, right? And you have Mavericks fans on Twitter like, oh, people stepping on Luka's ankles again, no way. And you see the replay, and Luka did tweak his ankle. It was non-contact, right? But he certainly tweaked it, and he kind of jumps up at the end of the play and kind of walks with the balls, looking at the ref like, why isn't that a foul? Doing his typical Luka thing. You have Pinto on the broadcast screaming, that should be a travel. Like, he's not worried about Luka having an injury. Like, Luka's stinking ankle touched the floor, and Pinto's over there like, that's a travel. And then friend of the podcast, Tyler Parker, I can't remember. I'll see if I can find it. I don't know if I'm on my personal Twitter now. Anyways, he had another funny quote from Pinto that he mentioned in there. Andrew Schlecht, who was on the podcast a couple nights ago, he mentioned as well tonight in a tweet how great Pinto is on the broadcast. Huge Pinto fan here. And look, Chris Fisher's a great guy, but man, we need Pinto in some form, some permanent role moving forward on the broadcast. So anyways, guys and gals, I think that is all I have. Like I said, the Thunder lose another fun one. One could argue another perfect tank game. I actually had a question about this like last week. What do you mean perfect tank game? Well, Thunder young guys performed, superstar, their main cornerstone moving forward, performed very well. Thunder played a super competitive and fun game, but they ultimately lose, which helps them in the tank standing to be able to get another superstar-like player to help them moving forward. That's what we mean when we say perfect tank game. So obviously the Cavs game would fall in a similar category as the one tonight. So the Thunder, they play again. They play against the San Antonio Spurs Wednesday night, which will be very interesting with DeJounte Murray playing fantastic right now. They have the Hornets Friday, another very fun team that's started to move into contention again, playoff contention again. And then they have a rematch with the Cavaliers on Saturday before finally coming back home after a 4-game road stretch on Monday against Billy Donovan, returning to OKC and the Chicago Bulls. So stay tuned, Uncontested. We'll have you all covered for all those games, as well as our weekly podcast on Sunday night. Until next time, Thunder up.